Hello and welcome back to Sci-Fi Stories. Before we begin, I want to share that YouTube has recently demonetized our channel, leaving us without an operating budget to pay our hardworking staff. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so our team can survive and keep creating these adventures for you. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the link in the description and comments below. Now, let us dive into the story. General Xylar had witnessed stars collapse and entire armadas burn in the cold silence of the void. Yet in all his cycles of military service, nothing terrified him quite like the sheer incompetence of the Galactic Council's automated filing system. It was a bureaucracy so bloated that it could turn a simple clerical error into a death sentence. And today, that death sentence came wearing beige cargo shorts. From his high-altitude observation deck, Xylar rubbed his upper pair of eyes in deep, agonizing frustration. As a veteran tactician of the four-eyed Xanthian race, his mind was built for complex battlefield calculations, not dealing with software glitches. He was the director of the Outer Rim Survival Academy, a gargantuan space station specifically engineered to simulate the most toxic hostile and carnivorous jungle environments in the known universe. It was a forging ground for the galaxy's most elite killers. But last night, the central algorithm had suffered a catastrophic memory leak. In its digital confusion, it had seamlessly swapped the intake manifests for the Interstellar Botany Exchange Program and the Vanguard Assault Force training course. Down on the intake platform, the teleportation gate hissed, venting thick clouds of ozone and chronal radiation as the new batch of recruits materialized. Xylar watched the monitors as the smoke cleared. Among the towering, heavily armed Deathworlders stood a human. According to the glitched digital slate in Xylar's hand, his name was Bernard Bates. He was not a cybernetically enhanced super soldier. He was a 55-year-old American high school biology teacher. Bernard stood out like a soft, fleshy thumb. He possessed a modest round protrusion around his midsection, often referred to as a beer belly. He wore a pair of faded cargo shorts, boasting an entirely unnecessary amount of pockets, a short-sleeved plaid shirt, and sensible hiking sandals. A botanical magnifying glass hung casually around his neck. In his right hand, he clutched a dented stainless steel thermos containing decaf coffee, a beverage entirely devoid of any practical chemical purpose. The actual Vanguard recruits immediately noticed the anomaly in their ranks. A Kragadon, a towering behemoth, measuring 3 meters tall and entirely covered in serrated horn armor, loomed over Bernard. The beast exhaled a thick cloud of sulfurous breath, its massive fists clenching. Beside the Kragadon, the air shimmered violently as a Vexil assassin dropped its active camouflage, clicking its venomous mandibles in a lethal warning. Any sane creature would have fallen to its knees and begged to whatever deity it worshipped. Bernard did not cower. He did not scream. Instead, he simply blinked, took a slow sip from his thermos, and pulled a small, spiral-bound notebook from one of his many pockets. "Fascinating," Bernard whispered, his eyes wide with genuine academic wonder. He began scribbling furiously. "Look at the vibrant, aggressive coloration on those dermal plates. And that aggressive posturing with the mandibles, is this a localized territorial defense mechanism, or perhaps a dominance ritual for a mating display? The sexual dimorphism in this quadrant must be absolutely staggering." Up in the control room, Xylar's adjutant stared at the monitor in stunned silence. The adjutant turned to the general and nervously asked if they should halt the intake protocol and file an emergency correction form. Xylar shuddered. To file a correction meant submitting Form 842, waiting 6 standard orbital cycles, and admitting a systemic flaw to the High Council. He looked back down at the soft, squishy human who was currently trying to get a closer look at the Vexil's venom sacs. The first field test was the Nightmare Biome. It was a meticulously crafted hellscape designed to melt, digest, or violently pulverize 99% of apex predators. No, Xylar commanded his 4 eyes, narrowing with cold, calculated ruthlessness. Leave the human exactly where he is. The jungle will correct this clerical error for us. By tomorrow morning there will be no human, and more importantly, there will be no paperwork. The metallic floor of the intake bay violently retracted, plunging the recruits into the heart of the nightmare biome. This was a synthetic ecosystem, engineered to be a botanical meat grinder. The atmosphere was thick with caustic humidity and the stench of rotting biomass. Sentient vines slithered through the upper canopy, hunting for thermal signatures to strangle. Carnivorous flora, possessing rudimentary nervous systems, waited in the shadows with their petal jaws open. The elite alien warriors immediately defaulted to their combat doctrines. They saw a hostile environment and sought to conquer it through aggression. Bladed appendages swung wildly, severing stalks and broad leaves. But the jungle always fought back. Every severed plant sprayed pressurized, highly corrosive sap. The recruits roared in fury as toxic fluids melted through their heavy armor and blistered their dense flesh. It was a chaotic symphony of brute force, meeting botanical retaliation. Amidst this violent frenzy, Bernard simply walked. He strolled through the death trap with the relaxed gait of a man enjoying a sunny afternoon hike in Yellowstone National Park. His hiking sandals crunched softly against the damp moss. He did not hack at the brush. He did not slash at the vines. He simply observed the natural flow of the ecosystem and moved in harmony with it. As a massive purple fern whipped its serrated fronds toward him, Bernard paused, adjusted his magnifying glass, and took a casual half-step to the left. A blistering stream of raw acid shot harmlessly past his plaid shirt, dissolving a solid titanium boulder behind him into bubbling slag. "Remarkable," Bernard muttered to himself, scribbling rapidly in his spiral notebook. The trifoliate leaf structure, combined with a waxy epidermal cuticle, is structurally almost identical to Earth's common poison ivy. The defense mechanism is just scaled up. Instead of producing a mild histaminic reaction, it secretes a liquid with a pH level of approximately 0.5. A fascinating convergence of evolutionary traits. He calmly navigated the grove of acid spitters by simply avoiding any plants bearing 3 distinct leaves, applying a basic survival rule every human Boy Scout learned by age 10. Suddenly, a deafening bellow of agony shattered the jungle's ambient noise. The 3-meter-tall Kragadon, the armored behemoth from the intake platform, crashed blindly through the underbrush and collapsed heavily near Bernard's feet. A cluster of venomous thorns had pierced the vulnerable joints of its thick horn armor. The alien's gray flesh was rapidly necrotizing, turning a sickly black as the potent neurotoxin raced toward its primary heart. The massive beast writhed on the forest floor, tearing at the ground, fully expecting to die a painful death. Bernard sighed carefully, placing his thermos on a nearby rotting log. He scanned the immediate vicinity, his analytical eyes darting across the fungal blooms growing on the exposed roots. He spotted a patch of pale, spongy moss clinging to a decaying stump. Without a second of hesitation, Bernard grabbed a handful of the dirt-covered fungus, popped the clump into his mouth, and began to chew vigorously. The remaining alien recruits paused and watched the human in horrified disgust. After mashing the fungus into a thick paste with his saliva, Bernard marched right up to the thrashing Kragadon. "Hold still, big guy," Bernard said softly, his voice echoing the calm authority of a seasoned teacher addressing a panicked student. "This is going to sting for about 2 seconds." He reached down and slapped the chewed poultice directly onto the seething wound. The chemical reaction was instantaneous. The highly alkaline enzymes, naturally present in the moss, rapidly catalyzed by the digestive amylase found within human saliva, violently neutralized the acidic venom. A puff of harmless white steam hissed sharply from the open wound. The Kragadon flinched, but the agonizing burning sensation vanished entirely, replaced by a soothing, cooling relief. The rapid tissue necrosis stopped dead in its tracks. The giant beast slowly opened its reptilian eyes, looking down at the soft, fleshy biped who had just halted its certain death, using nothing but weeds and spit. To the Kragadon's primitive culture, magic was not about sparkling lights. It was defined as the unexplainable power over life and death. The towering monster slowly rose to its feet, bowed its armored head low to the dirt, and positioned itself firmly behind Bernard. The beast had found its sorcerer of the deep forest, and from that moment onward, it would serve as his unbreakable shield. High above the treacherous canopy, inside the heavily fortified observation bunker, General Xylar stared fixedly at the primary surveillance monitor. His lower jaw hung slack. He had confidently activated the camera feeds, expecting to log the human's official time of death and clear the administrative error from the database. Instead, he was witnessing an utter defiance of galactic logic. On the glowing screen, Bernard was not merely surviving the nightmare biome. He was currently standing calmly in front of a colossal, man-eating flytrap variant, a monstrous plant known to devour heavy assault vehicles in a single bite. Yet the terrifying organism was entirely docile. Bernard had pulled a pair of pruning shears from his cargo pockets and was carefully snipping away dried vines and dead biomatter from the creature's massive jaws. "There you go," Bernard said cheerfully on the live audio feed, giving the deadly plant a gentle pat on its thick stalk. "Those burrowing space aphids were really causing you some nasty root rot, were they not?" The apex botanical predator of the outer rim literally drooped its enormous leaves toward the ground in a gesture of deep gratitude. Xylar rubbed his throbbing temples. The insignificant human was giving the deadliest flora in the known galaxy a haircut, and the terrifying flora was actually enjoying it. The established power dynamics within Vanguard Squad 7 had completely inverted. Traditionally, leadership among the recruits was determined by who could snap whose neck the fastest. The Vexel assassins, a proud and terrifying lineage of invisible hunters, decided they needed to test the soft human who had somehow tamed the jungle. They engaged their active optical camouflage, bending the light around their sleek, chitinous bodies until they vanished seamlessly into the dense foliage. They prepared a flawless, multi-directional mock ambush to assert their dominance. Bernard was busy examining a patch of glowing moss with his magnifying glass, when the air 10 feet to his left shimmered almost imperceptibly. Without looking up, Bernard pointed a stern, chalk-dusted finger at the empty space. "Now, whoever that is, I need you to step back," Bernard said mildly. "You are trampling a very rare patch of bioluminescent lichen." The active camouflage dropped instantly, revealing a lethal Vexil warrior whose venomous mandibles were frozen in absolute shock. The assassin chattered a frantic demand to know how the human possessed high-grade thermal optics without wearing a helmet. "Thermal optics?" Bernard chuckled, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. "No, I am just paying attention to the environment. When you shift your weight, you shake the broad leaves and disturb the morning dew trails. Plus, your cloaking field creates a distinct refractive index anomaly. You are bending the light rays perfectly, but you are failing to account for the shadows cast by the canopy above. Always check your shadow, young man." The elite assassin of the shadows sat down heavily on a rotting log, looking thoroughly bewildered. The fearsome killer suddenly felt exactly like a high school student who had just failed a pop quiz on basic physics. What were supposed to be grueling casualty-heavy survival marches across the hazardous quadrant quickly devolved into heavily armed nature walks. Bernard treated the lethal military exercises like mandatory biology field trips. Whenever the atmospheric alarm signaled an impending corrosive acid storm, Bernard simply led his monstrous entourage to the nearest geothermally active cave system, navigating by reading the growth patterns of subterranean fungus. During one of these subterranean detours, Bernard pulled a plastic bag of white squishy cylinders from the depths of his cargo shorts. He impaled one on a sharpened stick and held it over a bubbling vent of superheated tectonic gas. The squad of heavily armored Deathworlders watched in fascinated, unbroken silence as the marshmallow turned a perfect, crispy, golden brown. The trick, Bernard explained, blowing gently on his roasted treat, is consistent rotation. It is basic thermodynamics applied to crystallized sugar. He handed the sticky treat to the towering Kragadon, who gently took the stick with clawed fingers, the size of machetes, sniffing the caramelized confection with profound, almost religious reverence. As the squad rested in the warm glow of the thermal vent, they demanded to know the combat doctrines of Bernard's homeworld. They fully expected tales of orbital bombardments, plasma weapon trajectories, and glorious melee combat. Instead, sitting around the glowing pit, Bernard introduced the galaxy's most lethal predators to the true horrors of Earth's biological theater. He spoke of viruses and bacteria. He explained in clear academic terms how microscopic, non-thinking entities could invade a host, rewrite their genetic code at the cellular level, and completely dismantle an apex predator from the inside out. The alien warriors, whose entire culture was based on physical combat and impenetrable armor, shuddered collectively at the terrifying concept of an invisible enemy that could not be punched, sliced, or shot. And then there are parasites. Bernard continued, unscrewing his thermos and taking a slow sip. There is a specific wasp on Earth that lays its eggs inside a living caterpillar. The larvae hatch and eat the host alive from the inside, instinctively saving the vital organs for last, so the caterpillar stays fresh as long as possible. A Vexil assassin, a creature that literally drank the blood of its enemies in battle, hugged its own knees tightly and let out a soft, highly distressed whimper. But the absolute psychological breaking point came when Bernard explained ancient human hunting tactics. "We did not have natural armor on Earth," Bernard said, patting his soft plaid-covered stomach. "We lacked venom-sharp teeth and lethal claws. We were not even particularly fast sprinters, but we possessed two distinct evolutionary advantages. We could sweat to cool our core temperatures, and we were incredibly stubborn." He detailed the concept of persistence hunting. A human would simply track a faster, stronger animal. The animal would sprint away in a panic, exhausting itself, while the human would jog slowly, relentlessly following the tracks. The animal would rest, believing it was safe, only to see the human cresting the horizon a few hours later. Again and again the human would follow, never stopping, never tiring, until the prey's heart literally gave out from sheer physical exhaustion and relentless psychological terror. The monstrous recruits stared at Bernard with wide, unblinking eyes. The idea of a slow, soft, seemingly harmless creature walking towards you for days, acting as an unstoppable biological terminator that never slept until you died of pure fatigue, was the most deeply terrifying concept they had ever heard. A profound realization washed over the alien squad. The terrifying creatures around the campfire finally understood exactly how humanity had claimed the absolute apex position on their competitive death world. Humans did not conquer nature by fighting it with brute force. They conquered nature by understanding it, dissecting its complex rules, and manipulating its very foundation to serve their needs. Knowledge was their ultimate venom. Empathy and sharp observation were their impenetrable armor. The respect for Bernard Bates rapidly transitioned from mere awe into absolute, unshakable devotion. He had inadvertently become the supreme commander of the most dangerous squad in the Outer Rim Academy. He did not achieve this impossible feat through brutality, intimidation, or displays of martial supremacy. He secured their undying loyalty by enthusiastically lecturing about the mechanics of photosynthesis, teaching them how to filter heavy metals out of drinking water using crushed charcoal, and carefully applying adhesive bandages to the scraped knees of deadly stealth assassins. Whenever a squad member felt unwell from the toxic atmosphere, Bernard did not leave them behind to perish as the Vanguard Doctrine explicitly dictated. He brewed them a soothing cup of herbal tea from indigenous roots he had chemically verified. By doing so, He effectively turned a pack of solitary cutthroat killers into a highly cohesive, fiercely protective family unit. And the universe help any creature in that jungle that dared to interrupt the human's botany lesson. The third phase of the curriculum was entirely devoid of physical threats. It was designed to shatter the mind. Deep within the fortified lower levels of the academy lay the closed space chamber. This ancient, dimly lit room was far more than a mere isolation cell. It housed a highly advanced, faintly humming neuroprojector capable of interfacing directly with the subject's deepest genetic memories. The machine's singular purpose was to aggressively scan the evolutionary subconscious of any species and project, a flawless, interactive hologram of their ultimate natural predator. It forced the recruits to confront the absolute apex of their instinctual terror. The psychological toll was universally devastating. The imposing Kragadon, a beast that had previously shrugged off toxic acid storms, emerged from the heavy steel doors, trembling uncontrollably. It fell to its massive knees, weeping openly, after being forced to face a colossal, multi-headed space serpent that had hunted its ancestors across the primordial ash plains millions of years ago. The Vexil assassin, normally a stoic embodiment of lethal grace, crawled out of the chamber, shivering, having witnessed the terrifying bioluminescent hive mind parasites that once preyed upon its kind in the dark. Every single warrior was broken, their morale completely shattered by the ghosts of their evolutionary past. Then, it was Bernard's turn. Up in the primary observation deck, General Xylar leaned forward, his 4 eyes wide and unblinking. The entire faculty of military instructors gathered tightly around the surveillance monitors. The room was utterly silent. They had seen how humans conquered nature through sheer intellect and terrifying endurance. Now they were desperate to witness what kind of unimaginable godlike cosmic horror could possibly force a human to feel fear. What monstrous entity could hunt the hunters of Earth? Bernard stepped into the dark chamber. The heavy blast doors sealed shut behind him with a resonant thud. The neuroscanners hummed to life, projecting scanning beams that washed over his plaid shirt and cargo shorts. The room filled with a thick, artificial mist as the ancient computer delved into the dark depths of human history. Xylar held his breath, bracing himself for a holographic projection of a towering hyper-lethal monstrosity. He expected claws that could rend steel or fangs dripping with radioactive venom. Instead, as the mist slowly dissipated, there were no deafening roars. There was only the sharp, rhythmic clicking of expensive leather shoes stepping onto the metal floor. Standing opposite Bernard was not a monster. It was another human. The projection took the form of a middle-aged man wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal gray business suit. His hair was slicked back, and his eyes were completely devoid of warmth. In one hand, he held a sleek leather briefcase representing endless corporate greed and the systematic exploitation of natural resources. In the other hand, he casually held a red launch button, the undeniable symbol of nuclear annihilation and global warfare. The ultimate natural predator of a human was simply humanity itself. The alien instructors stared at the monitors in profound, chilling silence. The concept was entirely alien to them. Every other species in the galaxy feared something bigger, stronger, or faster than themselves. Humanity was the only species whose greatest existential threat came from looking into a mirror. Inside the chamber, the holographic suit sneered at Bernard stepping forward to radiate an aura of pure, suffocating malice. The simulation prepared to unleash a psychological assault of hopelessness, highlighting the inevitability of human self-destruction. But Bernard did not scream. He did not cower in the corner, nor did he attempt to strike the apparition. Instead, the biology teacher let out a long, profound sigh of disappointment. He casually unscrewed the cap of his thermos, took a sip of his decaf coffee, and walked over to a small metallic bench in the center of the room. He sat down and gestured for his dark alter ego to do the same. "You know," Bernard began, his voice echoing with the tired but patient tone of an educator addressing a heavily misguided student. You are fundamentally missing the entire point of existence. All this posturing, all this obsession with hoarding resources and threatening destruction, it is just a juvenile defense mechanism. It is quite sad, really. The holographic manifestation of human ruin froze its programmed logic, slightly confused by the complete lack of a fear response. You think power is about tearing things down, Bernard continued, leaning forward and resting his elbows on his knees. But true biological success is measured by what you cultivate. Have you ever considered the philosophical weight of planting a tree? There is an old Earth proverb that states, "Society grows great when old men plant trees, whose shade they know they shall never sit in." That is the true apex of evolution. Not dominance, but stewardship. We are capable of unleashing atomic fire, yes, but we are also capable of engineering crops to feed billions and preserving seeds in frozen vaults just to protect the future. Your greed is a loud, temporary glitch. Compassion is the long-term survival strategy. The ancient alien computer system began to emit a high-pitched, strained whine. The neuroprojector's artificial intelligence was trapped in an impossible paradoxical logic loop. The system registered that the subject was facing its ultimate predator. However, the subject's neurological response was not fight, nor was it flight. The subject was attempting to gently educate and rehabilitate its predator using profound empathy and botanical metaphors. The contradiction was too massive for the processor to handle. Sparks violently erupted from the sensory nodes lining the walls. Thick, acrid black smoke billowed from the ceiling grates. With a final agonizing metallic screech, the entire closed space chamber suffered a catastrophic short circuit, plunging into total darkness. The simulation completely collapsed. Up in the observation deck, the monitors dissolved into static. General Xylar slowly backed away from the console, his primary hearts pounding frantically against his ribs. He had just witnessed a creature that recognized its own species as the ultimate destroyer of worlds, yet consciously chose to respond to that ultimate darkness with calm, unyielding kindness. With shaking hands, Xylar opened the heavily encrypted galactic security database. He located the official file for the planet Earth. Bypassing several warning prompts, he manually elevated humanity's threat level from a moderate localized hazard to an absolute maximum priority galactic crisis. Any species that could look their own Armageddon in the eye and try to teach it a lesson on gardening was far too dangerous to be left unmonitored. The final graduation exercise was scheduled to commence at exactly 0800 hours, but the universe had drastically different plans. Deep space perimeter alarms dormant for over 300 cycles abruptly shattered the relative quiet of the Outer Rim Survival Academy. The blaring sirens were not part of any simulation. A massive, undulating shadow blotted out the distant starlight through the observation windows. They were known in forbidden ancient texts as the Voracious, a hyper-aggressive swarm of giant parasitic space insects entirely uncatalogued by modern military databases. They did not attack. They consumed. Like a tidal wave of chittering mandibles and razor-sharp chitin, thousands of the terrifying creatures violently breached the primary hull, tearing through the reinforced Durasteel airlocks as if they were made of damp paper. They flooded the hallways a living carpet of hunger that devoured metal flesh and energy with equal ferocity. The station's primary power grid suffered a catastrophic overload and plunged the facility into strobing crimson emergency lighting. General Xylar and his veteran instructors immediately deployed to the lower decks, drawing their heavy plasma rifles and activating their personal kinetic shields. They fired concentrated volleys of searing energy directly into the surging tide of monsters. It was entirely useless. The exoskeletons of the Voracious were coated in a naturally occurring anti-magnetic scale that perfectly refracted directed energy and neutralized force fields on contact. The blinding laser fire simply bounced off their armored carapaces, scorching the walls and ceilings instead of halting the enemy. Xylar watched in absolute horror as his elite cadre's weapons harmlessly sparked against the horde. The giant insects simply crawled over the useless energy shields, their massive jaws easily snapping the high-tech defense mechanisms and forcing the galaxy's greatest warriors to retreat in utter disgrace. Down in the staging area, Vanguard Squad 7 found themselves completely surrounded. The recruits previously hardened by the lethal jungle biome were now paralyzed by a fundamentally different type of terror. A Kragadon warrior could snap the spine of a massive predator, and a Vexil assassin could decapitate a target before they blinked. But brute force and stealth were mathematically irrelevant against a hive mind swarm. For every insect they crushed underfoot or sliced apart, 4 more instantly adapted to the tactic, replicated through rapid biological fission, and swarmed the defenders. It was a localized apocalypse. The giant bugs, each roughly the size of a large earth canine, began to overwhelm the heavily armored aliens through sheer suffocating volume. Despair rapidly infected the ranks as their martial prowess proved completely inadequate. Amidst the deafening cacophony of shrieking metal and alien roars, Bernard stood perfectly still. He carefully unlooped the lanyard from his neck, removed his magnifying glass, and polished the lens with the hem of his plaid shirt. He surveyed the chaotic, writhing mass of mandibles pouring through the breached bulkheads. "Well, would you look at that?" Bernard muttered to himself, his voice completely devoid of panic. "This is exactly like the terrible locust plague of 1998, back at my uncle's farm in Nebraska. The only real difference is that these particular pests are the size of golden retrievers." Bernard did not see an unstoppable alien armada. He saw a severe agricultural infestation, and Bernard Bates knew exactly how to handle pests. "Squad 7, listen to me right now," Bernard shouted, his authoritative teacher voice, cutting through the din of battle with startling clarity. "Drop your standard combat formations. We are no longer soldiers. As of this exact second, we are a professional pest control service. I need total cooperation." The terrified recruits instantly snapped to attention, their deeply ingrained respect for the human overriding their primal fear. "You, the big guy," Bernard commanded, pointing a firm finger at the towering Kragadon. "Your armor is thick enough to withstand their bites for a short duration. I need you to stand directly in front of the main atmospheric circulation intake. Plant your feet, spread your arms, and act as a physical windbreak. Do not let them clog that vent under any circumstances." The behemoth grunted in absolute compliance, charging forward to form a living barricade against the tide of snapping jaws, trusting the human implicitly. "My stealth experts," Bernard pivoted toward the Vexil assassins. "Your optical camouflage still works because they hunt via thermal and electromagnetic signatures which your cloaks suppress. I need you to slip back into the nightmare biome immediately. Go to the 3rd quadrant near the sulfur pools. Harvest as many of those purple swollen fungal spore sacs as you can carry, and bring back 3 gallons of the corrosive tree sap from the weeping willows we encountered on day 2. Go." The invisible killers vanished into the chaos without a single question, perfectly executing the bizarre supply run. Within minutes, they returned, their arms laden with the highly toxic, volatile botanical ingredients. Bernard rapidly set up a makeshift chemistry station on top of a shattered weapon crate. He instructed the recruits to carefully mix the violently acidic tree sap with the hyper-dense fungal spores inside several empty ammunition canisters. When these 2 biological agents interact under high pressure, Bernard explained rapidly, while tightening the seal on the last canister, they undergo a rapid exothermic reaction. It will vaporize the spores, creating an aerosolized neurotoxin that specifically targets the respiratory spiracles of arthropods. Earth farmers have been using similar aggressive fumigation techniques for centuries to protect their seasonal crop yields. We are simply scaling up the delivery mechanism. In simple terms, we are making a giant bug bomb. He dragged the pressurized canisters over to the main ventilation shaft, where the Kragadon was tirelessly holding back the swarm. Bernard manually bypassed the safety valves on the station's life support interface, reversing the airflow to pump directly into the breached corridors rather than the safe zones. "Stand clear!" Bernard yelled. He punctured the primary canister with a sharp piece of shrapnel and shoved the leaking, hissing container deep into the spinning turbine of the ventilation system. A thick, sickly green mist violently erupted from the vents, surging through the hallways like a localized hurricane. The aerosolized pesticide flooded the corridors, aggressively invading the respiratory systems of the swarm. The effect was devastatingly immediate. The relentless tide of the voracious suddenly halted. Their chittering screams turned into gargled hisses as the botanical neurotoxin paralyzed their nervous systems. Thousands of the invincible space bugs began to seize violently, curling their legs inward, before dropping to the metal floor, completely neutralized by a high school science experiment. The thick green pesticide mist settled, leaving thousands of dead alien locusts littering the metallic corridors. A momentary sigh of relief washed over the squad, but it was brutally cut short. The reinforced bulkhead leading into the primary reactor core violently buckled. With a deafening shriek of tearing steel, the Swarm Queen smashed through the barrier. She was a nightmare of evolutionary perfection, easily the size of a heavy armored transport vehicle. Unlike her drones, her glistening exoskeleton was entirely resistant to the botanical neurotoxin. She had tracked the squad into the dead end of the reactor chamber. There was no escape route, no structural weakness to exploit, and absolutely no hope. Death seemed utterly inevitable. The Vanguard recruits, the most lethal warriors in the known galaxy, finally surrendered to despair. They raised their useless weapons, preparing to die on their feet, in one last futile charge against the invincible monstrosity. Bernard Bates, however, did not look at the Queen's razor-sharp scythes or her dripping venomous maw. He was intensely observing the rapid, rhythmic twitching of her massive feathered antennae. He then looked at his squad. The aliens were hyperventilating, their multiple hearts hammering wildly against their chests in sheer, unadulterated panic. The realization struck Bernard with the clarity of a freshly polished microscope lens. "Do not attack," Bernard ordered, his voice cutting through the heavy, terrified silence of the reactor room. "Drop your weapons right now, all of them." The squad hesitated, but the absolute trust they had forged in the human prevailed. Heavy plasma rifles and serrated blades clattered onto the metal floor. "Now," Bernard instructed, stepping firmly to the front of the group. "I need every single one of you to close your eyes. You are panicking, and your biological terror is exactly what she is looking for. She is blind. She hunts exclusively by tracking the electromagnetic spikes generated by extreme fear and elevated heart rates. We are currently glowing like a neon sign in the dark." The colossal Queen reared back, preparing to strike. "Listen to my voice," Bernard said, adopting the deep, soothing cadence he usually reserved for students having panic attacks before final exams. "Breathe in through your nose for 4 seconds. Hold that breath for 4 seconds. Now exhale slowly through your mouth for 4 seconds. Focus only on the air filling your lungs. Let the fear go. You are a tree deeply rooted into the earth, unmovable, calm. In the face of certain annihilation, the most terrifying monsters in the galaxy closed their eyes and meditated. The towering Kragadon slowed its massive dual-chambered heart. The Vexel assassins focused their minds, dropping their thermal signatures to match the ambient room temperature. The collective pulse of Vanguard Squad 7 plummeted. The Queen paused mid-strike. The blinding electromagnetic beacon of their fear had suddenly vanished. To her specialized sensory organs, the heavily armored prey had simply ceased to exist. Confused and thoroughly disoriented, the giant beast lowered her head. She opened her massive, multi-hinged jaws wide, attempting to taste the chemical composition of the air to locate her missing meal. This was the exact biological vulnerability Bernard had been waiting for. With slow, deliberate movements that generated zero panic, Bernard stepped forward. He unhooked his dented stainless steel thermos. He knew that the decaffeinated coffee inside contained highly concentrated trace elements, specifically ethyl acetate and methylene chloride. Completely harmless to humans, but theoretically devastating to an alien arthropod's central nervous system. Combined with the coffee's natural acidity, it was a biological weapon. With a practiced casual swing, reminiscent of tossing a crumpled paper ball into a classroom wastebasket, Bernard threw the open thermos directly down the queen's gaping throat. The effect was cataclysmic. The queen snapped her jaws shut, swallowing the dark liquid. Instantly, her massive body convulsed violently. The highly specialized chemical compounds aggressively short-circuited her primary neural ganglia. She let out one final garbled screech before her legs buckled beneath her. The gigantic apex predator crashed onto the floor, completely paralyzed and brain-dead. The battle was over. Not a single drop of Vanguard blood had been spilled. 2 hours later, the Galactic Council's elite rescue force finally cut through the blasted blast doors. They rushed in with heavy flamethrowers, fully expecting to clear out gruesome casualties. Instead, the heavily armed strike team froze in profound confusion. The reactor room was peaceful. Bernard Bates was sitting comfortably cross-legged on the floor, using a piece of charred metal to draw the life cycle of a standard Earth butterfly on the deck plating. Surrounding him, sitting in a neat half-circle, were the galaxy's most bloodthirsty killers. They were sitting quietly, with their hands folded in their laps, nodding thoughtfully, and taking diligent notes on whatever scrap material they could find. The official graduation ceremony was held 3 days later. It was the most highly attended event in galactic history. Standing on the grand podium, General Xylar presented Bernard with the Star of Valor, the highest military honor ever conceived. Representatives from every major stellar armada practically begged the human to accept a position as a supreme tactical commander. Bernard smiled warmly, accepted the medal, and politely declined every single offer. "I am incredibly flattered," Bernard addressed the Grand Assembly, adjusting his glasses. "But summer is approaching on my hemisphere, and my heirloom tomatoes are just coming into season. If I do not get back to water them, the soil will lose its optimal moisture retention. But keep practicing those breathing exercises, boys." The story of Bernard Bates became an interstellar legend. He left behind a galaxy forever changed perfectly, summarized by the final chilling entry in General Xylar's personal audio diary. Humanity is not terrifying because they possess the capacity for unmatched destructive power. They are terrifying because they possess the profound, undeniable ability to walk into a definitive survival hell and simply turn it into a classroom. They conquer not with fire, but with observation, empathy, and absolute patience. Effective immediately, this facility will officially be renamed the Bates Academy of Biological Sciences. And may the universe have mercy and protect any foolish empire that ever dares to declare war on the planet Earth. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We truly appreciate every single one of you who tunes in to share these adventures with us. Please let us know in the comments where you are listening from today. If you enjoyed this journey and want to help our channel survive, please consider donating just $1. Your support pays, our staff helps them feed their families, and ensures we can keep creating these wonderful stories for you. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the secure PayPal link located in the video description and pinned comment below. Thank you again, and we will see you in the next story.